It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Professor Higgins said Australian states and territories should follow the lead of 62 other countries and close defence loopholes, making it legal for parents to hit their kids if they use, quote, reasonable force.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Today on the Happy Families podcast, a conversation about something that really gets people going. It's a tough one to talk about. We're going to do it respectfully, but we do need to talk about smacking. Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm the founder of happyfamilies.com.au, the author of 7 books about how our families can be happier, and the parenting expert and co-host on Channel 9's Parental Guidance. I'm here with Kylie, mum to our 6 kids, and my parenting podcast partner. And we're going to talk about an article that appeared in the paper just a couple of days ago. This is a 2-minute read. I'm going to read the whole thing, Kylie, and then we're going to discuss the issue of smacking. I did media interviews up to my eyeballs last week about it once it showed up in the paper, and there's just so much to talk about. So it was written by Susie O'Brien. We've had her on the podcast before. She writes for the Herald Sun in Victoria, although sometimes her articles end up nationwide, and she wrote that really great book about how we should just ease off a little bit with our parenting. Here's what she writes. 6 in 10 young Australians have been smacked repeatedly by their parents and are nearly twice as likely to develop anxiety and depression as other teens and adults, according to new research. The shocking findings of a national study of 8,500 Australians have led to calls for the removal of the legal defence of, quote, reasonable chastisement in Victoria, which allows parents to use physical violence on their children. Children deserve equal protection against physical violence as adults, one of the lead researchers, Australian Catholic University Professor Daryl Higgins, said. In Australia right now, you have better protection from violence as a female adult or a pet than you do as a child, he said. If you want to reduce population-level anxiety for women and men, don't hit them as children. There is a very real connection between corporal punishment and current and lifelong experience of mental ill health, Professor Higgins from the Institute of Child Protection Studies said. The findings come as other Australian studies have found 50 to 80% of parents admit to smacking their child, with many uncertain about where to draw the line or what constitutes abuse. The preliminary results from the Australian Child Maltreatment Study shows 61% of Australians aged 16 to 24 experienced corporal punishment from their parents on more than 3 occasions as a disciplinary strategy while growing up. That was 61%. Initial findings to be presented at the Australian Institute of Family Studies conference on Thursday show females who experienced corporal punishment from their parents were 1.8 times more likely to have a major depressive disorder in their lifetime and 2.1 times more likely to experience generalised anxiety. Males were 1.6 and 1.7 times more likely to develop anxiety and depression, respectively. Let me wrap up here with the last couple of things that this article highlights. Professor Higgins said Australian states and territories should follow the lead of 62 other countries and close defence loopholes, making it legal for parents to hit their kids if they use, quote, reasonable force, close quote, during discipline. And then because this is in the Herald Sun, she goes straight to Victoria and says, Victoria does not have specific legislation regarding parents using physical punishment on their children. Common law offers parents and caretakers a defence for parental use of physical punishment. Meanwhile, in New South Wales, it is illegal for parents and guardians to strike children on the head or neck. A child's pain should not last longer than a short period if a parent hits them anywhere else on their body. Queensland's domestic discipline legislation states both teachers and parents can use force that is reasonable under the circumstances but doesn't provide further detail. Professor Higgins said the current survey also shows attitudes to violence are changing. The study shows support for corporal punishment as a form of discipline for children dropped from 37.9% among those aged over 65 to 14.8% for those aged 16 to 24. Isn't it interesting? The older generation's all for hitting, the younger generation's not so much. Professor Higgins said violence cannot be excused as a one-off or just one hit because the study showed it had a negative impact. The only benefit, he says, is immediate compliance, but we know it's clearly linked to long-term harm. Parents and caregivers need to be using positive parenting techniques rather than outmoded forms of discipline that cause harm and are associated with other forms of abuse. So that's the article. I know there's a fair bit in there, but I think that we need to unpack this and spend some time on it because Australia still doesn't make smacking illegal. Australian parents are still allowed to hit their kids. By the way, Sweden was the first country in the world to outlaw all forms of corporal punishment, including in the home. That was back in 1979. And Kylie, 62 countries, like I said, have followed suit since then. The Republic of Korea and Colombia are the latest nations to ban physical punishment for kids. They did that last year. And in Spain, where parents are also banned from smacking, corporal punishment, hitting your kids, actually falls under the country's definition of violence against children. It's seen as domestic abuse. So strong words, strong language, important article. So Kylie, where do you want to start with this?
This is a really, really hard conversation to have.
I've watched you as I'm reading this, and I'm watching you slouch in the chair. Your composure, your demeanour, everything's changed since we began. Like, this is a topic that really affects you.
Having grown up in a home where there was quite a heavy hand of discipline dished out, the argument that it never did me any harm doesn't wash very well with me at all. This conversation is really grating on, I guess, memories and experiences that I had as a child, and without painting my parents as being these awful people, because I know that they were doing the very best that they knew how to do with the skill set that they had.
Yeah, and your parents are good people.
And they are good people, and they loved me.
Yeah.
But it was still a really, really difficult upbringing coming out of it at the other end. And I guess moving forward, being the parent who, having been raised in that regard, finding herself in the same position multiple times over the years with our children, where impulse takes over and you find yourself, doing things that you never wanted to do or never thought that you had the capacity to do because you're at your limit or you're at your wit's end. You don't know what other options are available.
So we've never claimed that we're perfect parents, and as much as we hate to admit it, the whole reason that I do what I do is because I lost it with our 3-year-old one day, and I walloped her. I mean, I was, by definition, I was violent towards her. I was physically violent. I whacked her, and I whacked her again, and then I whacked her again because she wouldn't go to sleep, as if she was going to go to sleep when I was hitting her. I've written about that. As much as I hate to talk about it, I hated to write about it. I wrote about that in the introduction of 21 Days to a Happier Family, because I didn't want our family to be like that anymore. That's why I went back to school and spent the next 8.5 years studying and became an academic and do the work that I do now. But we do need to talk about it, and I'm grateful that you've shared what you've shared. What about after the break we talk about the common reasons that people say that kids need to be hit, and bit by bit I'll pull that apart and highlight that there is a better way. That's next on the Happy Families podcast.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we're having a difficult conversation about smacking. It's come up again. Countries around the world are banning it as a form of discipline for children.
And Australia's staying firm in their right to abuse children or to hit children or to be 6 times larger than your kid and to hit them anyway, which is, I guess I'm being a bit provocative when I say that. But
I think the reality is that most parents who would utilise smacking as a parental tool would never suggest that or never feel that they're being abusive.
Yeah,
or
you're exactly right.
And would acknowledge it's just a tap, or do you know what I mean? I think that the majority of smackers wouldn't be what we would consider your heavy-handed corporal punishment.
No,
parental force.
Well, even if you look at me,
grown up with.
When you think about that time, and it's not the only time, unfortunately, but when you think about the times where we've whacked one of our kids, people wouldn't have looked at us even back then and gone, oh my goodness, those people are so horrible to their children. I mean, we were a loving family. We treated the kids with love and kindness and respect all the time, except those few occasions when, kaboom, everything, we lost the plot and flew off our handle as they were flying off theirs. So let's talk about the main reasons that people defend smacking. I think that that's probably the best way for us to move forward here.
I think the number one is you get immediate compliance.
Right.
You smack your child, they stop doing what they're doing immediately, whether it be out of fear,
Yes.
whether it be out of shock factor, because all of a sudden they're now, they've been hit and there's pain, but there's instant compliance.
So when we look at research on that, believe it or not, a study was published maybe 6 or 7 years ago by a guy called George Holden. He's one of the world's foremost discipline researchers, and he is a pure academic. I love the way he does his research. He went into people's homes with cameras and recording devices and literally recorded what happened when kids were smacked. And here's what he found. In 73% of cases when children were smacked, they were back at the same or other challenging behaviour in less than 10 minutes. So even that idea that you get that instant compliance, it's a furphy. It's not completely true. The kids will start to rebel, start to play up, start to do something else challenging within 10 minutes in 73% of cases. Therefore, that argument, while it makes sense intuitively, while it feels right, the evidence suggests that it's not right.
The argument to that, which I've heard numerous times, is you clearly didn't smack them hard enough.
Yeah. I mean, that's awful, isn't it? What an awful thing to do. Oh, it didn't work, so you should do more of it and do it harder. We can be better than that. I think you can tell a lot about a society by the way they treat their children. And right now, this is an area that we're failing. What's another argument for smacking?
Well, you can't reason with children.
This is one of my favourites. I'm cutting you off straight away because I love it when somebody says this because it's so easy to debunk. The way that I debunk this argument, you can't reason with children, so therefore you need to hit them, is you can't reason with somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia. So does that mean that we should start hitting people in retirement homes? Like, the thought is just repulsive. It's so earth-shatteringly wrong. Nobody would even consider that we would be hitting elderly people because of their inability to reason, because they've lost their thinking capacity. And yet we make the same argument and think that it's acceptable. We let it fly for our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. It's just not an argument. What's the third reason that we've come up with for why people justify smacking their kids?
Well, it's the only thing that works.
Yeah, except it doesn't work. And we've kind of talked about that already. The other thing is when we look at the research evidence, there are so many positive parenting techniques, so many gentle techniques, so many understanding techniques.
Yeah, but I talk and I talk and I talk at my kids and they just don't listen.
Maybe it's not about you talking to them. I mean, I love that story from Stephen Covey where he says a man approached him after a seminar and said, "I can't understand my son. He won't listen to me." And Covey responded, "Let me say that back to you. You can't understand your son because he won't listen to you." And the man said, "Yeah, that's right." He said, No. Let me say it again. You can't understand your son because your son won't listen to you." And the man agreed again, to which Stephen Covey said, "I thought for you to understand someone, you need to listen to them." What's the next reason that people say smacking is useful?
Well, it never did me any harm.
Oh, so I'm going to link in the show notes. We don't have time for the whole debunking here, but I'm going to link in the show notes to an article that I wrote that was published in the New York Times a couple of years ago. It was about the "I turned out fine" fallacy. This idea that because I was hit as a child, I turned out fine. The reality is you can't know if you turned out fine or how you might have turned out differently had you not been smacked. And when we look at the research that's been cited from the Australian Catholic University and Daryl Higgins, what we're seeing is that the data shows quite clearly that there is a correlation between being hit as a child and mental health outcomes throughout childhood and adulthood. I don't think that we can mount a credible argument that we turned out fine. And even if we did turn out fine, is fine the baseline? Is that the benchmark? I want my kids to turn out wonderfully. I don't want them to be fine. I want them to be fabulous. So it just doesn't wash for me that these arguments are still used to defend an archaic practice that does not do anything redeeming, anything positive for our kids at all.
Well, for the time poor parent, it's just quick and easy.
Yeah, it is. It is quick and easy, but it undermines everything else. And there's something that I've been teaching for years and years and years, and that is that fast is slow and slow is fast. You go for the quick fix, but you pay for it down the road. If you spend the time now, it works out. So let's talk about 5 reasons really quickly that we don't want to smack our kids, given that they're the arguments that people use for smacking, and I hope that I've debunked them reasonably well. My first idea for why we shouldn't smack kids is that corporal punishment is violence. And teaching our kids violence begins a cycle where children learn to express their anger through violence towards themselves or others. I think that's a strong argument. My second argument is that when we hit our children, we treat their bodies as not their own. We teach them that other people are allowed to enter their body space with ill intent. And if that person is bigger, they can use their size to exert power over them. And I want my kids to know that their body is theirs and that they're in control. My job as a parent is to elevate and amplify that control, not take it away. And my third instinct is to point towards smacking as something that weakens kids psychologically. If they feel unsafe with their parents, the psychological overflow is that they may end up feeling that they're unworthy. It may lead some of our kids to feel so much shame that they feel like they're bad or dangerous or untrustworthy, and it sows the seeds of insecurity that could last a lifetime. Our job as parents is to help our kids feel safer and stronger, not weaker and more insecure. My fourth reason for not smacking kids is that there's 55 years of smacking research that shows no positive effects. 55 years of research. We're not talking about abuse research. We're talking about what Americans call spanking. And my fifth one is really simple. Because we feel crappy. We feel like we're lousy parents when we whack our kids. No parent has ever given their kids a good whack and said, well, job done. Now back to it. I nailed that. Got that so right. It's not what we say. We walk away and we feel so awful for having done it because we know that that's not what our relationship's supposed to be built on. Any final comments?
When I think about the relationship that I have with my children, I want them to see me as a safe place, not a place to be feared, not someone that they want to, kind of hide from. And I can't be that place if smacking is in my toolkit, because I become, for all intents and purposes, I become the perpetrator. I become a violator of everything that I actually hold safe and sacred.
I'm so glad you said that. This didn't end up being the podcast I thought it would be. I thought we'd have a light conversation about something that needs to change, but it's really affected me, and I can tell that it's really affected you. So we're going to wrap it up there. For everyone who's participated and listened to this podcast, thank you for being here today. If you have any stories about this topic that you would like to share with us, we would love for you to send us a voice memo. Keep it short and send it to podcasts@happyfamilies.com.au. Just open up your phone, record yourself talking into your voice memo app, and then send that voice memo to podcasts@happyfamilies.com.au. This is a conversation that needs to continue until we see some real change. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about making your family happier, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au, where you'll find endless solutions for how to stop smacking your kids and start loving them all.